The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine campus of Kepler Interstellar Academy, where beings from 17 different species gathered to learn the complex art of diplomatic relations. Among the crowd of students hurrying to their first class of the semester, a young woman with shoulder-length brown hair walked quietly, her worn leather bag slung over one shoulder. She moved with the same purposeful stride as her classmates, checking the same holographic schedule display and carrying the same nervous energy that marked all first-year students. Sarah Chen had spent 3 months preparing for this moment. The application process alone had taken nearly a year, with countless interviews, psychological evaluations, and academic assessments. The Galactic Council's most prestigious institution accepted only the brightest minds from across known space, and somehow, impossibly, she had made it. The lecture hall buzzed with a symphony of languages, translator devices creating a gentle hum as they worked to bridge communication gaps between species. Sarah found a seat in the middle section, neither too eager in the front nor hiding in the back. Around her she recognized some of the galaxy's most influential species. The tall crystalline Vorthak clicked softly as they communicated through mineral resonance. Several Zephyrians floated gracefully above their seats, their gossamer wings catching the light. A group of reptilian saurians discussed something in their native tongue, their scaled heads nodding in agreement. Professor Keld, a distinguished Altarian with silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the artificial light, entered the chamber. His forearms moved in elegant gestures as he activated the holographic display systems. The room fell silent with the kind of respect reserved for legends. Keld had negotiated the peace treaties that ended 3 major conflicts in the Outer Rim territories. "Welcome, students, to Advanced Interspecies Relations," Keld began, his voice carrying the musical quality typical of his people. "Over the next 4 years you will learn not just the theory of diplomacy, but its practical application in our complex galactic community. Today we begin with introductions." The professor's lower right arm gestured toward the seating arrangement. "When I call your name, please stand and share your homeworld and primary area of interest." Sarah's heart rate increased slightly as names were called in alphabetical order. She watched as her classmates stood one by one. Zorith Blackstone from the mining colonies of Titan 7 wanted to specialize in resource allocation disputes. Melissa Darthon, a Centaurian with pale blue skin, hoped to work in cultural preservation advocacy. Each introduction revealed the incredible diversity of backgrounds and aspirations represented in the room. "Chen, Sarah," Professor Keld called out, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. Sarah stood, clearing her throat softly. "I'm from Earth, Terra Sector. I'm interested in first contact protocols and integration procedures for newly discovered civilizations." She sat back down, thinking her introduction had been routine and unremarkable. Around her, conversations continued as other names were called. But something had changed in the room's atmosphere, though Sarah couldn't quite identify what it was. Professor Keld's expression had shifted almost imperceptibly. His usual fluid movements became more deliberate, more careful. Several students were whispering to each other, and Sarah noticed more than a few glances directed her way. The Saurian delegation had gone completely silent, their amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. The roll call continued, but the energy in the room had definitely altered. When Professor Keld dismissed the class 30 minutes later, students filed out in small groups, but many lingered, clustering together in hushed conversations. Sarah gathered her materials slowly, trying to understand what had happened. As she walked toward the exit, a tall Vorthak student blocked her path. The crystalline being's internal light pulsed in patterns Sarah's translator couldn't interpret, but the tone seemed aggressive. "Excuse me," Sarah said politely, trying to step around the imposing figure. "Your name is Chen, Sarah," the Vorthak stated, the translator rendering its mineral speech into flat, emotionless words. "From Earth. Yes, that's correct." Sarah kept her voice steady, though confusion was growing into concern. The Vorthak's crystalline structure seemed to sharpen, edges becoming more defined. "Impossible." Before Sarah could ask what was impossible, the being moved aside, but not before every student in the immediate area had stopped to stare. Sarah hurried out of the lecture hall, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and bewilderment. The corridor outside was filled with students from various classes, creating a colorful tapestry of galactic diversity. Sarah tried to blend into the crowd, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every few steps, she caught someone staring at her, then quickly looking away when she made eye contact. At her locker, Sarah fumbled with the biometric scanner, her hands trembling slightly. The lock finally recognized her palm print and opened with a soft chime. As she organized her materials for the next class, she overheard a conversation between two Zephyrian students floating nearby. "Did you hear what happened in Professor Keld's class? The human? Yes, everyone's talking about it, but it can't be the same name. That's impossible." Professor Keld seemed to think otherwise. "Did you see his reaction?" Sarah closed her locker harder than necessary, the metallic clang echoing through the corridor. The Zephyrians drifted away quickly, their conversation dying. She stood there for a moment, trying to process what she had heard. What did they mean by the same name? The same as what? Her next class was Galactic History, taught by Dr. Thane, an elderly human professor who had been teaching at the academy for over 2 decades. Sarah hoped that being in a class with a professor from her own species might provide some normalcy to her increasingly strange day. The history classroom was smaller and more intimate than the lecture hall, with only about 30 students. Sarah chose a seat near the window, where she could look out at the academy's botanical gardens. The sight of familiar earth plants growing alongside exotic flora from dozens of worlds should have been comforting, but she couldn't shake her growing unease. Dr. Thane entered carrying an old-fashioned paper notebook, a relic from Earth that marked him as someone who valued traditional methods. He was tall and thin, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Sarah felt some of her tension ease as he smiled warmly at the assembled students. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Thane, and this is Galactic History. Over the course of this semester, we'll explore the major events that shaped our current interstellar civilization." He set his notebook on the podium and looked around the room. "I like to start each semester by taking attendance personally. It helps me learn your names and begin to understand the diverse perspectives you'll bring to our discussions." As Dr. Thane called names, Sarah noticed that he seemed to know quite a bit about many of his students already. He made personal comments about their homeworlds or asked about family members who had previously attended the academy. When he reached her name on the list, however, his demeanor changed completely. "Chen, Sarah," he called out, then paused, his eyes finding her in the crowd. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, his expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that looked almost like fear. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Sarah finally responded. "Here, sir." Dr. Thane nodded slowly, made a mark in his notebook, and continued with the roll call. But Sarah could see that his hands were shaking slightly, and he kept glancing in her direction throughout the remainder of the class. Dr. Thane's lecture on the formation of the Galactic Council felt distant and muffled to Sarah's ears. She found herself focusing more on his nervous glances than on his words about trade route establishment and early diplomatic protocols. When class ended, she made a point of lingering, organizing her notes slowly while other students filed out. "Dr. Thane," she called out as the last student left, "could I speak with you for a moment?" The professor looked up from his notebook, and Sarah saw him take a deep breath before nodding. "Of course, Miss Chen, please have a seat." Sarah moved to the front row, settling into a chair directly in front of his desk. "I'm sorry if this sounds strange, but I've been getting unusual reactions to my name today. People seem surprised when they hear it. I was wondering if you might know why." Dr. Thane removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture Sarah recognized as someone buying time to think. When he replaced them, his expression was carefully neutral. "Sarah, how much do you know about Earth's early contact with the Galactic Council?" The question caught her off guard. "The basic history, I suppose. First contact was made in 2157, formal relations established in 2162. Earth became a junior member in 2168. And the name of Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council?" Sarah frowned, searching her memory of high school history classes. "I'm not sure. Ambassador Chen something, I think. It was over a century ago." Dr. Thane's expression grew more serious. "Ambassador Sarah Chen, Earth's first representative to the galactic community, and according to many historians, one of the most influential diplomats in the Council's history." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stared at Dr. Thane, her mind racing. That's just a coincidence. Chen is a common surname, and Sarah isn't exactly unusual either." "Perhaps," Dr. Thane said carefully. But you have to understand, Sarah, that name carries significant weight in diplomatic circles. Ambassador Chen's negotiations established Earth's position in the galactic community. Her work on the Titan Accords prevented what could have been the first interspecies war. Her protocols for integrating new civilizations are still used today. Sarah felt dizzy, but she died decades ago, right? That's where the story becomes complicated. Dr. Thane leaned forward, lowering his voice. Ambassador Chen disappeared during the Nexus crisis in 2198. Her ship was lost in hyperspace during an emergency diplomatic mission. No trace was ever found. So she's been dead for over 40 years, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Presumed dead, Dr. Thane corrected, but there were always rumors. Some claimed they had seen her on various worlds, always working behind the scenes to prevent conflicts or facilitate peaceful resolutions. The stories became something of a legend among diplomats. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. I'm 19 years old. I was born on Earth in 2291. My parents are David and Lisa Chen, both teachers in New Shanghai. I have school records, birth certificates, medical records going back to childhood. Dr. Thane held up a hand in a calming gesture. I'm not suggesting anything supernatural, Sarah. I'm simply explaining why your name might be causing reactions. Many of the faculty here knew Ambassador Chen personally. Professor Keld worked with her on several major negotiations. That's why he looked like he'd seen a ghost, Sarah murmured, sinking back into her chair. Exactly. And it's not just the name, Sarah. There are physical similarities, too. Ambassador Chen was also a young woman of Chinese descent, about your height and build. The resemblance is striking. Sarah ran her hands through her hair, trying to process this information. What am I supposed to do? Change my name? Drop out of the academy? Absolutely not, Dr. Thane said firmly. You earned your place here through your own merit. Your entrance scores were among the highest in your class. Your essay on interspecies communication protocols was brilliant. You deserve to be here regardless of what name you carry. But people are going to keep staring, keep whispering. Probably, Dr. Thane admitted, at least until they get to know you as yourself, rather than as an echo of someone from the past. Give them time. Sarah gathered her belongings, her mind still reeling. Dr. Thane, what was she like? Ambassador Chen? The professor smiled for the first time since their conversation began. Brilliant. Compassionate. She had an uncanny ability to find common ground between species that seemed to have nothing in common. But more than that, she was brave. She never backed down from a challenge if she thought it would help achieve peace. She sounds amazing. She was. And Sarah? Dr. Thane's voice grew serious again. Be careful. There are those who never wanted Ambassador Chen's diplomatic methods to succeed. Her disappearance was convenient for certain factions. If people start believing you're connected to her in some way. The warning hung in the air as Sarah left the classroom, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The academy suddenly felt different, less welcoming. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Every whispered conversation seemed to be about her. Her communicator chimed with a message from her roommate Keiko, a human student from the Mars colonies. Meet me in the dining hall? I have news about our study group. The dining hall was a marvel of interspecies accommodation, with environmental zones adjusted for different atmospheric requirements and food preparation areas designed for various dietary needs. Sarah found Keiko at a table in the human-compatible section, picking at a salad while scrolling through her tablet. Finally, Keiko said as Sarah sat down, I've been getting the strangest messages all day. Apparently, half the sophomore class wants to join our study group now, and 3 different faculty members have asked me about you. Asked you what about me? Basic stuff. Where you're from, what your family does, how long we've known each other. It was weird, Sarah. Like they were investigating you or something. Sarah's appetite disappeared entirely. What did you tell them? The truth. That we met during orientation week. That you're from Earth, that you seem really smart and nice. Keiko set down her fork and studied Sarah's face. What's going on? You look terrible. Sarah explained her morning's discoveries, watching Keiko's expression shift from confusion to amazement to concern. Holy stars. Keiko breathed when Sarah finished. You have the same name as the Ambassador Chen? No wonder everyone's freaking out. It's just a coincidence, Sarah insisted, though she was beginning to doubt her own words. Is it, though? Keiko leaned forward conspiratorially. Think about it, Sarah. What are the odds? The same name, similar appearance, and you just happen to get interested in diplomacy and first contact protocols. Plenty of people are interested in diplomacy. But how many of them score high enough to get into Kepler Academy? And specifically choose to focus on first contact work? Keiko's eyes were bright with excitement. What if you're related to her somehow? A descendant, maybe? My family tree doesn't go back that far with any detail, Sarah admitted. And even if I were related, what would that matter? I'm not her. Maybe not, Keiko said, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the universe has a sense of humor or justice or something. Maybe it's not about who you were, but who you could become. That evening, Sarah lay in her narrow dormitory bed, staring at the ceiling display that showed a real-time view of the stars visible from their current location. The Academy orbited a small moon in a neutral system, deliberately chosen to be equally inconvenient for all member species. She pulled up her personal files on her tablet, scrolling through family photos and documents. Her parents looked exactly as she remembered them. Kind, ordinary people who had been thrilled when their daughter was accepted to the galaxy's most prestigious school. There was nothing mysterious about her childhood, nothing that suggested any connection to legendary diplomats. But as she looked at an old photo of herself at age 12, receiving an award for mediating a dispute between rival student groups at her school, she felt a chill. She had always been good at helping people find common ground, at seeing both sides of an argument. She had assumed it was just a natural talent, but what if it was something more? Her communicator buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Professor Keld's office number. Sarah hesitated, then accepted the call. Miss Chen, the professor's musical voice filled her room. I apologize for contacting you so late, but I wanted to speak with you privately. Could you come to my office tomorrow after your morning classes? Of course, Professor. Is everything all right? There was a pause before Keld responded. That remains to be seen. Sleep well, Miss Chen. Tomorrow we may have much to discuss. The call ended, leaving Sarah alone with her racing thoughts and the endless stars above. Professor Keld's office was unlike any academic space Sarah had ever seen. The walls curved organically, following Altarian architectural principles that emphasized harmony with natural forms. Bioluminescent panels provided soft, shifting light that changed color based on the occupant's emotional state. Currently, they glowed a concerned amber. Keld sat behind a desk that seemed to grow from the floor itself, his forearms moving in subtle gestures as he reviewed files on multiple holographic displays. When Sarah knocked on the partially open door, he looked up and gestured for her to enter. Please sit, he said, indicating a chair that automatically adjusted to human proportions as she approached. Would you care for refreshment? I have several Earth-compatible options. No, thank you, Professor. I'm too nervous to eat or drink anything right now. Keld's skin shifted to a warmer silver tone and his voice carried notes of compassion. Your honesty is refreshing, Miss Chen. It reminds me of someone I once knew. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Ambassador Chen. Indeed. Keld closed the holographic displays with a gesture, giving Sarah his full attention. I worked with Sarah Chen for nearly 15 years. She was my colleague, my friend, and quite possibly the finest diplomat I have ever encountered. Dr. Thane told me she disappeared during something called the Nexus Crisis. The Nexus Crisis, Keld repeated, his tone growing darker. A manufactured conflict designed to destabilize the Galactic Council. Several member species had grown dissatisfied with the peaceful integration policies that Ambassador Chen had championed. They preferred more aggressive expansion methods. Sarah leaned forward in her chair. What happened? A new species called the Corvani had been discovered in the Nexus sector. They were technologically advanced but isolated, suspicious of outside contact. The hardline faction wanted to forcibly integrate them, claiming they posed a security threat. Ambassador Chen believed they could be peacefully contacted and offered voluntary membership in the council. Keld stood and moved to a wall display that showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. He highlighted a region in the outer rim with one of his arms. Against direct orders from the council majority, Ambassador Chen took a small diplomatic ship to the Nexus sector. She believed she could negotiate with the Corvani before the military fleet arrived. Her ship entered hyperspace and was never seen again. And the Corvani? The military fleet found their system empty. No ships, no planetary settlements, no trace that they had ever existed. as if an entire civilization had simply vanished. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. That's impossible. Many things are impossible until they happen, Keld replied. The official report blamed navigation errors and hyperspace anomalies for Ambassador Chen's disappearance. The hardliners used the incident to justify more aggressive first contact protocols. The peaceful integration policies were abandoned, but you don't believe the official report. Keld's skin color shifted to a deeper silver, almost gray. I believe Ambassador Chen found the Corvani. I believe she discovered something important enough to risk her life for. And I believe she succeeded in whatever she was trying to accomplish. Based on what evidence? The fact that you're sitting here. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah stared at Keld, trying to process what he was suggesting. Professor, I'm 19 years old. I was born 13 years after Ambassador Chen disappeared. I'm not her. No, Keld agreed. But consider this. After the Nexus crisis, there were subtle changes throughout the galaxy. Conflicts that should have erupted instead found peaceful resolutions. New species that were discovered were approached with more caution and respect, despite official policies. Trade disputes that could have led to wars were somehow resolved through back-channel negotiations. Coincidence? Perhaps. But in every case, the solutions bore the hallmarks of Ambassador Chen's diplomatic style. And in several instances, witnesses reported seeing a young human woman who seemed to appear just before critical negotiations, then disappear once peace was achieved. Sarah's hands were shaking now. You're suggesting she's still alive? After 40 years? I'm suggesting that time flows differently in hyperspace. I'm suggesting that the Corvani may have had technologies we couldn't comprehend. And I'm suggesting that Ambassador Chen may have found a way to continue her work from outside normal space-time. This is insane. Sarah stood up abruptly, beginning to pace. Even if any of that were true, what does it have to do with me? Keld activated another holographic display, showing two images side by side. One was clearly from Ambassador Chen's official diplomatic photo, showing a young woman with kind eyes and a determined expression. The other was Sarah's student ID photo. The resemblance was undeniable. Your genetic markers, Keld continued, show some anomalies that our medical scanners couldn't identify. Your psychological profile indicates problem-solving abilities that are off the charts for someone your age. And your entrance essay on first contact protocols contains strategies that haven't been published anywhere, yet match exactly the methods Ambassador Chen developed in classified situations. Sarah sank back into the chair, feeling overwhelmed. You think I'm her clone? Or some kind of time-displaced version? I think you're you, Keld said gently. But I also think your presence here now is not coincidental. The galaxy is approaching another crisis point. Several species are pushing for abandonment of the current council structure. There's talk of dividing territory based on military strength rather than mutual cooperation. And you think I can stop that somehow? I think Ambassador Chen spent 40 years preparing for this moment. And I think she sent you. Before Sarah could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the academy. Red lights flashed in the corridors and an automated voice announced, "All students and faculty report to designated emergency shelters." This is not a drill. Keld's skin shifted to a brilliant silver, a sign of extreme alarm in his species. He quickly activated his communication console, his forearms working different controls simultaneously. What's happening? Sarah asked. Unknown ships approaching the academy, Keld replied, his voice tense. Configuration suggests Saurian military vessels, but they're not responding to communication attempts. Through the office's large window, Sarah could see other ships materializing from hyperspace. They were sleek and predatory-looking, with weapon ports clearly visible along their hulls. The Saurians are council members, Sarah said. Why would they attack the academy? Because they've discovered you're here, Keld replied grimly. The hardline faction has been waiting 40 years for Ambassador Chen to resurface. They're not going to let her slip away again. But I'm not her. Try convincing them of that. Another wave of ships appeared, these bearing the markings of the Vorthak Collective. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the implications. They're working together, she whispered. An alliance of hardliners from multiple species, Keld confirmed. They want to end the Council's peaceful policies permanently, and they see you as the symbol of everything they oppose. Emergency escape pods were launching from various points around the academy, as students and faculty evacuated. But Sarah noticed that some pods were being intercepted by the attacking ships. They're not letting anyone leave, she realized. They want to be sure they have you, Keld said. Come, we need to get to the emergency command center. There may be another way off the station. As they moved through the corridors, Sarah's mind raced. Whether she was Ambassador Chen's successor, her clone, or simply an unlucky coincidence, it was clear that her very existence had triggered a crisis that could destroy everything the Galactic Council had built. The question was, what would Ambassador Chen do in this situation? And more importantly, was Sarah capable of doing the same? The answer came to her with startling clarity as they reached the command center. Ambassador Chen would find a way to turn this crisis into an opportunity for peace. She wouldn't run or hide. She would face her enemies directly and find a solution that protected everyone. Professor, Sarah said, stopping before they entered the command center. I need to speak with those ships. Absolutely not. They want to capture or kill you. Maybe. Or maybe they want to hear what Ambassador Chen's successor has to say. Keld stared at her for a long moment, his skin cycling through several color changes. Finally, he nodded slowly. Very well, but we do this on our terms, not theirs. As explosions echoed through the Academy's hull, Sarah Chen prepared to step into her destiny. The emergency command center buzzed with controlled chaos as faculty members coordinated evacuation efforts, and damage control teams worked to repair systems damaged by the attacking ships. Admiral Thex, a veteran Centaurian officer who served as the Academy's security chief, looked up as Sarah and Professor Keld entered. Professor Keld, thank the stars you're safe, Admiral Thex said, her blue skin darkened with stress. We're trying to organize a complete evacuation, but they're jamming our hyperspace communications and intercepting escape pods. Admiral, Sarah said, stepping forward, I'm Sarah Chen. I believe this attack is because of me. The Admiral's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to alarm in quick succession. The Chen student everyone's been talking about. Stars help us, you do look like her. Admiral, I need to open communications with the attacking fleet, Sarah said. This doesn't have to end in violence. Absolutely not, Admiral Thex replied firmly. Even if you could reach them, revealing your location would be suicide. These aren't rational actors, Miss Chen. The hardliner faction has been planning this for decades. But that's exactly why I need to talk to them, Sarah insisted. They're here because they see me as a threat to their plans. What if I could show them I'm not? Professor Keld moved to the central communication console, his forearms dancing across the controls. Admiral, the Saurian flagship is hailing us. Put it through, Admiral Thex ordered reluctantly. The main display screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Saurian military vessel. The reptilian features of Commander Vask filled the screen, his amber eyes cold and calculating. Sarah recognized the species but had never seen such hostility in their expression before. Admiral Thex, Commander Vask spoke, his words clipped and precise through the universal translator. We know you are harboring the Chen imposter. Surrender her immediately, and the rest of your people will be allowed to evacuate safely. Commander Vask, Admiral Thex replied, this is neutral territory under Council protection. Your attack is a violation of 16 different treaties. Treaties negotiated under the influence of Chen's poisonous ideology. Vask snarled. We no longer recognize the authority of a council corrupted by human weakness. Sarah stepped forward before anyone could stop her. Commander Vask, this is Sarah Chen. The Saurian's expression shifted to something between triumph and confusion. You are not Sarah Chen. The real Chen disappeared 40 years ago. You're right, Sarah said calmly. I'm not the Ambassador Chen you knew. I'm a 19-year-old student who just wants to learn diplomacy and help prevent conflicts like this one. Lies, Vask hissed. We have monitored your academic records, your psychological profiles, your genetic markers. You are either Chen herself, returned through some unknown technology, or you are a weapon designed to continue her work. And what work is that exactly? Sarah asked. Trying to find peaceful solutions to conflicts, helping new species integrate voluntarily into the galactic community? How is that a threat to anyone? Because it is weak. Vask's voice rose to a roar. Your predecessors' policies have created a galaxy of soft civilizations dependent on negotiation instead of strength. We have become vulnerable to external threats because we have forgotten how to fight. Another voice joined the conversation as a second communication channel opened. A Vorthak crystalline being appeared on a split screen. its internal light pulsing with aggressive patterns. "I am Overseer Orcs," the being announced. "The collective agrees with Commander Vask. The Chen Doctrine has infected the galaxy with pacifist ideology. Strong species are forced to accommodate weak ones instead of natural selection determining survival." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Overseer Korix, Commander Vask, you're both describing cooperation as weakness. But working together has allowed us to achieve things none of our species could accomplish alone. The technology that brought us to the stars, the medical advances that have extended life across dozens of species, the scientific discoveries that continue to expand our understanding of the universe, all of these came from collaboration." "Collaboration with inferiors holds back the superior," Korix replied, its crystalline form brightening. "The collective has outgrown the need for such limitations. Have you?" Sarah challenged. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you needed to form an alliance with multiple species to attack one unarmed academy." "That seems like cooperation to me." Commander Vask's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You twist words like she did." "This ends now." The communication cut off, and immediately the academy shuddered under renewed weapons fire. Admiral Thex was shouting orders to her staff, but Sarah was no longer listening. An idea was forming in her mind, dangerous and unprecedented, but potentially the only way to prevent a massacre. "Professor Keld," she said quietly, "you mentioned that Ambassador Chen's ship disappeared in hyperspace during the Nexus crisis." "Yes. But what does that have to do with—" "And you said time flows differently in hyperspace. What if she didn't just disappear? What if she found a way to exist outside normal space-time?" Keld's skin shifted to a concerned yellow. "Sarah, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that maybe there's a reason I'm here with this name at this moment. Maybe Ambassador Chen has been waiting 40 years for the right crisis to resolve. You want to contact her somehow?" "I want to become her." The command center fell silent except for the distant sounds of weapons fire and emergency alarms. Admiral Thex stared at Sarah as if she had announced her intention to sprout wings and fly. "Miss Chen," the Admiral said carefully, "that's impossible." "Is it?" Sarah turned to Professor Keld. "You said my genetic markers showed anomalies. You said my psychological profile was unprecedented. What if those aren't coincidences? What if they're preparations?" Keld's forearms moved in agitated patterns. "Even if such a thing were possible, the risks would be enormous. We don't understand the technologies involved, the potential consequences. The consequences of doing nothing are pretty clear," Sarah replied, gesturing toward the main display where enemy ships continued their assault. "How many students and faculty will die if this continues? How many species will leave the Council if they see the Academy destroyed? How many wars will start because the hardliners prove that force is more effective than diplomacy?" Another massive explosion rocked the station and the lights flickered. Damage reports flooded in from all sections. "Admiral," one of the technicians called out, "the main reactor is showing critical fluctuations. If they hit it directly, the entire station will be destroyed," Admiral Thex finished grimly. Sarah walked to the central console and placed her hands on the smooth surface. "Professor Keld, is there a way to access Ambassador Chen's personal files?" "Her private research notes?" "Theoretically, yes. Her diplomatic archives are stored in the Council's most secure databases, but accessing them would require authorization from her successor," Sarah said firmly. "From me." Keld hesitated for a moment, then began working at the console. "The system is asking for biometric confirmation." Sarah placed her palm on the scanner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the console came alive with data streams, file directories, and research notes that had been sealed for 4 decades. "Access granted," the computer announced. "Welcome back, Ambassador Chen." As files began to download and display, Sarah felt something shift inside her mind. Not memories exactly, but understanding. Connections between ideas that she had never consciously learned. Diplomatic strategies that felt familiar despite being completely new to her. And somewhere in the flood of information, she found what she was looking for. "There," she said, pointing to a technical schematic. "The Corvani spatial displacement technology. Ambassador Chen didn't just contact them during the Nexus crisis. She learned from them." "Sarah," Professor Keld said urgently, "your vital signs are showing massive fluctuations. Whatever's happening to you, it's affecting your entire nervous system." "I'm fine," Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Better than fine. I understand now. She turned to face the assembled faculty and staff. The Corvani didn't disappear during the Nexus crisis. They transcended. They learned to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Ambassador Chen went with them to learn their methods, and she's been using that knowledge to influence events throughout the galaxy ever since. And now? Admiral Thex asked. Now it's time for her final lesson. Sarah began working at the console with movements that seemed far too practiced for someone who had never used the system before. Data flowed across multiple screens as she accessed protocols and technologies that officially didn't exist. I'm going to stop this attack, she announced, but not by fighting back. I'm going to show them what real strength looks like. As she initiated sequences that would fundamentally alter the nature of space around the Academy, Sarah Chen prepared to discover whether she was simply a determined student or something far more extraordinary. The air in the command center began to shimmer with an energy that made everyone's skin tingle. Sarah's fingers moved across the control interfaces with impossible fluidity, as if she had operated these systems for decades. The ancient Corvani technologies, hidden in Ambassador Chen's classified files, responded to her touch like instruments recognizing their master. Sarah, stop, Professor Keld said urgently, his skin cycling through rapid color changes. The energy readings are off the charts. You're going to tear a hole in space-time. Not a hole, Sarah replied, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. A bridge. Through the Academy's viewports, the attacking ship suddenly found themselves surrounded by impossible geometry. Space itself began to fold and twist around them, not destructively, but in ways that defied their understanding of physics. Weapons that had been firing moments before went silent as the crews struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. Admiral Thex stared at her tactical displays in amazement. They're ships. They're not damaged, but they're completely immobilized. It's like space itself is holding them in place. Because it is, Sarah said. The Corvani learned that the universe has far more dimensions than most species ever discover. Force and violence only work in three-dimensional space, but diplomacy works across all realities. The main communication system activated automatically, broadcasting on all frequencies. Sarah's image appeared on the bridge of every ship in the attacking fleet, but she looked different now. Not older exactly, but carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had negotiated peace treaties across 100 worlds. Commander Vask, Overseer Orcs, this is Ambassador Sarah Chen, she began, and her words carried weight that transcended mere sound. I want to thank you for coming here today. You've given me the perfect opportunity to demonstrate why cooperation will always be stronger than conquest. On the Saurian flagship, Commander Vask was frantically trying to regain control of his ship's systems. What have you done to us? Release my vessels immediately. Your ships are perfectly safe, Sarah replied calmly. In fact, they're safer than they've ever been. The spatial matrix surrounding you will protect you from any external threats. Consider it a gift. Overseer Corix's crystalline form pulsed with agitated light patterns. Trickery! You cannot hold us indefinitely with these illusions. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed. I can't hold you against your will, but I can show you something that might change your perspective. The space around the Academy began to shift again, and suddenly the assembled ships found themselves looking at scenes from across the galaxy. Not recordings or projections, but real-time views of dozens of worlds where conflicts were being resolved through negotiation rather than force. What you're seeing, Sarah explained, are the fruits of Ambassador Chen's work over the past 40 years. Every time you thought diplomacy had failed, every time you believed force was the only solution, there was another way being quietly implemented. The images showed Zephyrian refugees being welcomed on Altarian colonies, Saurian mining operations working in partnership with Vorthak crystal harvesters, human medical teams treating plague victims on worlds they'd never visited before, scene after scene of cooperation replacing conflict, of understanding bridging differences that had seemed insurmountable. This is propaganda, Commander Vask snarled, but his voice carried less conviction than before. This is truth, Sarah replied, and you know it because your own ships participated in some of these operations. Commander Vask, 3 years ago your fleet provided escort for Centaurian relief supplies to the Outer Rim colonies during the plague outbreak. Overseer Corix, your collective's crystal technology has been integrated into life support systems that keep millions of beings alive across dozens of species. The bridge of the Saurian flagship fell silent as Vask struggled with the implications of her words. You came here today because you believe strength means the ability to dominate others, Sarah continued, but real strength means the ability to lift others up. Real power means creating systems where everyone can thrive, not just the strongest. Another shift in the spatial matrix, and suddenly the attacking ships found themselves positioned to see the Academy's defensive capabilities. Weapon systems that had been hidden throughout the station became visible, showing that the Academy could have destroyed the attacking fleet long before they fired their first shot. We didn't use these weapons, Sarah said, not because we're weak, but because we're strong enough to choose a better way. Admiral Thex leaned toward Professor Keld and whispered, "Those weapon systems don't exist. I've been security chief here for 15 years and I've never seen those installations." "They exist now," Keld replied quietly, his eyes fixed on Sarah's transformed presence. "She's not just accessing Ambassador Chen's knowledge, she's accessing her capabilities." On his ship, Commander Vask was studying the tactical readouts with growing amazement. These defensive systems, they're decades beyond anything in our databases. The power output alone could have vaporized your entire fleet in the first 30 seconds of your attack, Sarah confirmed. But we chose to protect rather than destroy. We chose to demonstrate rather than dominate. That's the difference between real strength and mere aggression. Overseer Korix's crystalline structure began to dim as the implications sank in. The Academy was never vulnerable. You allowed us to attack to prove a point. I allowed you to attack because you needed to learn what you were really fighting against, Sarah said. You're not fighting a weak ideology or a failed diplomatic system. You're fighting the natural evolution of civilization itself. The spatial matrix shifted again, this time showing them visions of possible futures. In one timeline, the hardliner faction succeeded in destroying the Council's peaceful policies, leading to cascading wars that consumed whole sectors of the galaxy. In another, cooperation continued to spread, leading to unprecedented prosperity and expansion into previously unreachable regions of space. The choice is yours, Sarah said. You can continue to believe that might makes right, and watch civilization tear itself apart. Or you can join us in building something better. Commander Vask was silent for several long moments, studying the futures spread out before him. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued. "And if we refuse? If we maintain our position? Then you're free to go," Sarah replied simply. "I'll release your ships and you can return to your home systems. But you'll do so knowing that you chose isolation over integration, conflict over cooperation. And when the next crisis comes, when your people need help that only comes from alliance with others, you'll remember this moment." The command center around Sarah had become something more than a military installation. Reality itself seemed more fluid here, more responsive to will and intention than to physical law. Her fellow students and faculty watched in awe as she negotiated not just with hostile forces, but with the fundamental nature of existence itself. "Sarah," Professor Keld said softly, "are you still you?" She turned to look at him, and for a moment her eyes held depths that spoke of experiences across multiple lifetimes. Then she smiled and she was 19 again. "I'm me," she said, "but I'm also her. We're connected across time and space, sharing purpose and knowledge. Ambassador Chen has been preparing for this moment for 40 years and now it's here. And after this? What happens to you?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think that depends on whether I'm needed elsewhere. The galaxy is full of conflicts that need resolution, species that need guidance in joining the larger community. Ambassador Chen's work is far from finished." On the main display, Commander Vask was conferring with his officers. Overseer Korix was doing the same, the crystalline being's internal light fluctuating as it processed this new information. Finally, Vask reopened communications. "Ambassador Chen, I request permission to discuss terms." "What kind of terms, Commander?" "Terms for the Saurian hegemony's continued participation in the Galactic Council. It appears we may have been hasty in our assessment of the situation." Overseer Korix's image joined the communication. "The Vorthak Collective also wishes to negotiate. These capabilities you have demonstrated suggest possibilities we had not previously considered." Sarah smiled, and for just a moment, those watching could swear they saw the ghostly image of an older woman smiling alongside her. "I was hoping you'd say that." Now let's talk about what real strength looks like when it's used to build rather than destroy. As negotiations began in earnest, the space around the academy gradually returned to normal. But everyone present knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The legend of Ambassador Chen had become reality once more, and the galaxy was about to discover what 40 years of preparation could accomplish. 3 weeks after the attack on Kepler Academy, the largest diplomatic gathering in galactic history convened in the neutral space around the Academy itself. Representatives from over 200 species filled conference chambers that had been rapidly constructed using a combination of traditional engineering and the reality-shaping technologies that Sarah had revealed during the crisis. Sarah stood before the Great Assembly, no longer wearing the simple student attire she had arrived with, but diplomatic robes that seemed to shift between the formal styles of dozens of different cultures. The transformation that had begun during the attack had continued, stabilizing into something unprecedented. I, a being who existed simultaneously as a 19-year-old human student and as the accumulated wisdom of Ambassador Chen's 40 years of interdimensional work. Honored representatives, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber without technological amplification. We gather today not to negotiate the terms of surrender or conquest, but to discuss the next phase of galactic civilization. The assembly included not just the traditional council members, but also species that had never been contacted before, brought forward by Sarah's expanding network of dimensional bridges. In the front row sat Commander Vask and Overseer Orcs, both visibly changed by their experiences 3 weeks earlier. The events at this academy forced us to confront a fundamental question, Sarah continued. What does it mean to be strong? For too long we have defined strength in terms of the ability to impose our will on others. But true strength lies in the ability to expand possibilities, to create solutions where none existed before, she gestured. And the space above the assembly filled with a 3-dimensional representation of the galaxy, showing the complex web of relationships between different species and territories. For 40 years, Ambassador Chen worked to build a network of cooperation that extended beyond the visible political structures of the Council. She established communication channels between species that had never met, facilitated resource sharing that prevented scarcity-based conflicts, and most importantly, she prepared for the moment when our civilization would need to make a choice about its future. The galactic map shifted, showing trade routes, communication networks, and cooperative projects that spanned previously impossible distances. That moment has arrived, Sarah announced, not because of any external threat, but because we have reached the limits of what we can accomplish within the confines of 3-dimensional thinking. A new figure materialized beside Sarah, the translucent image of Ambassador Chen as she had been 40 years ago, but somehow more substantial, more present than a simple hologram. I speak to you now from the space between realities, the image said, her voice carrying the same multidimensional harmonics that Sarah's had developed. For 4 decades, I have worked with the Corvani and other transcended species to prepare our galaxy for this transition. The choice before you is simple in concept, but revolutionary in scope. Remain confined to the limitations of single-dimensional existence, or join us in exploring the infinite possibilities of multi-dimensional civilization. Murmurs of amazement and concern rippled through the assembly. Representative Zarek of the Hegemony, a traditional ally of Commander Vask, stood to address the gathering. Ambassador Chen, with respect for your legendary service, what you're proposing sounds like the dissolution of everything we have built. Our species have distinct cultures, territories, needs. How can multidimensional existence preserve what makes us who we are? Sarah smiled and gestured again. The space above the assembly shifted to show individual representatives, but now each figure was accompanied by multiple images showing the same being in different dimensional states. Representative Jarak, observe yourself in parallel dimensions, Sarah said. In one reality, you are indeed the proud Saurian warrior you are here. In another, you are a philosopher who has spent centuries contemplating the nature of existence. In a third, you are a teacher helping young beings of all species understand their place in the universe. The representative stared at his multidimensional selves in wonder. They are all me? They are all possibilities that exist within you, Sarah explained. Multidimensional existence doesn't erase who you are. It allows you to become everything you could be. Your warrior self continues to protect and serve. Your philosopher self continues to seek truth. Your teacher self continues to share wisdom, but now they can work together across realities to achieve things that none could accomplish alone. Overseer Corix's crystalline form brightened with interest. The collective has long sought to achieve perfect unity among our kind. Could this technology allow for true shared consciousness while preserving individual identity? Not just among the Vorthok, the image of Ambassador Chen replied. True multidimensional existence would allow for voluntary consciousness sharing across all species boundaries. Imagine the innovations possible when a Centaurian artist's creativity combines with Altarian technical precision and human emotional depth. The risks must be enormous, observed Dr. Palan, the Centaurian Minister of Science. What safeguards exist to prevent one species from dominating others in these shared states? Sarah approached Dr. Palan's delegation, and as she walked, her form seemed to briefly flicker through multiple appearances: human, Centaurian, Altarian, and species that many had never seen before. The safeguards are built into the nature of multidimensional reality itself, Sarah explained. Domination requires a hierarchy, a structure where one being is above others. But in multidimensional space, there is no above or below in any meaningful sense. There are only different perspectives on the same infinite possibilities. You're asking us to fundamentally alter the nature of existence, Commander Vask said, his voice carrying both awe and uncertainty. How can we be certain this is the right path? You can't, Sarah admitted. But consider the alternative. Our current civilization is approaching several critical limitations. Population growth is straining the resources of most star systems. Communication across galactic distances creates inevitable delays that complicate cooperation. Most importantly, we're beginning to encounter other galaxies with civilizations that have already made this transition. The assembly fell silent as the implications sank in. Other galaxies? Representative Jarak asked. The image of Ambassador Chen nodded gravely. The Andromedans achieved multidimensional existence nearly 1 million years ago. They've been patiently waiting for our galaxy to reach the same developmental stage. Soon, they will make formal contact. When that happens, we can meet them as equals who have transcended dimensional limitations, or as primitives confined to single reality existence. This is why the hardliner faction's approach was so dangerous, Sarah continued. A civilization built on dominance and conquest cannot survive contact with truly advanced multidimensional beings. Only a civilization built on cooperation and mutual elevation can hope to join the larger community of transcended galaxies. She gestured once more, and the assembly chamber itself began to shift, walls becoming translucent to reveal the vast cosmos beyond. But now that cosmos was revealed to have infinite layers, each one containing whole universes of possibility. The choice is before you now, Sarah said. Remain as you are, and eventually stagnate within the confines of single-dimensional thinking. Or take the leap into true cosmic citizenship. Professor Keld, who had been observing silently from his position with the Academy delegation, raised one of his forearms. Ambassador Chen, Sarah, what happens to those who are not ready to make this transition? Not every individual or species will feel prepared for such a fundamental change. No one will be forced, Sarah assured him. The transition will happen gradually over generations if necessary. Some individuals will choose to remain in single-dimensional existence, and their choice will be respected. Others will explore the boundaries between realities, and some will dive fully into multidimensional consciousness. But the important thing, Ambassador Chen's image added, is that for the first time in galactic history, these will be choices rather than limitations. Each being will be free to exist at whatever level of dimensional complexity feels right for them. The debate continued for hours, with representatives raising concerns, exploring possibilities, and gradually coming to understand the magnitude of what was being offered. As the session drew to a close, Sarah addressed the assembly one final time. Distinguished representatives, you have 24 hours to consult with your governments and peoples. Tomorrow, we will take the first formal vote in galactic history not just on a policy or treaty, but on the fundamental nature of our civilization's future. As the representatives filed out, many still discussing the day's revelations in hushed tones, Sarah remained in the chamber with Professor Keld and the translucent figure of Ambassador Chen. Are you ready for tomorrow? Ambassador Chen asked her younger self. Sarah smiled, and for a moment she looked entirely like the 19-year-old student who had arrived at the academy just weeks before. I don't think anyone could be ready for what we're proposing, but that's never stopped humanity from taking the leap into the unknown. The vote was scheduled for noon, Galactic Standard Time, but beings from across known space had been arriving since dawn. The Academy's expanded conference facilities hummed with nervous energy as representatives made final consultations with their home governments, many using the new dimensional communication channels that Sarah had opened to enable real-time conversations across impossible distances. Sarah stood in what had once been her dormitory room, now transformed into a private office where the accumulated weight of galactic history pressed down on her shoulders. Through the transparent walls, she could see ships from hundreds of worlds maintaining formation around the Academy, not as a military force, but as witnesses to a moment that would reshape civilization itself. Professor Keld entered without announcing himself, a privilege earned through the weeks of crisis they had navigated together. His skin showed the calm silver of determination, mixed with the subtle gold patterns that indicated deep affection. "How are you feeling?" he asked simply. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "Yesterday I was worried about passing my first-year exams. Today I'm about to ask an entire galaxy to fundamentally alter the nature of existence." Ambassador Chen felt the same way before the Titan Accords. Keld observed. "I remember her pacing her quarters all night, convinced she was about to make a mistake that would doom millions of beings to war. Did she ever doubt that she was doing the right thing?" "Every day," Keld replied. "But she once told me that doubt was the price of wisdom. Only those too ignorant or too arrogant to understand the consequences of their actions never experience doubt." Sarah's communicator chimed with an incoming message from Admiral Thex. "Ambassador, the assembly is ready for you." As they walked through corridors that now seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, Sarah and Keld passed students and faculty who had become something more than their original roles. The crisis had transformed the Academy into the first truly multidimensional educational institution, where beings could learn not just about different species, but about different realities. The Great Assembly had grown overnight. Its space expanded through dimensional folding, to accommodate not just the official representatives, but observers from species that had never before participated in galactic politics. Sarah recognized beings from the far rim territories, the deep space nomad fleets, and even a few that she suspected might be from entirely different galaxies. As she approached the central podium, Sarah felt the weight of thousands of eyes upon her. But more than that, she felt the presence of Ambassador Chen and the countless other beings who had worked toward this moment across decades of careful preparation. "Honored representatives," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through both normal space and the dimensional channels that now connected distant worlds. 24 hours ago, I asked you to consider the most important question in our galaxy's history. Today you will answer it," she gestured, and the space above the assembly filled with a real-time map of known space, showing the voting status of each world and species as they made their decisions. The preliminary reports show that 63% of represented civilizations are prepared to begin the transition to multidimensional existence. 27% request additional time to consider the implications. 10% have voted to maintain current dimensional limitations. A murmur of surprise rippled through the assembly. Many had expected the vote to be much closer. But before we proceed with the formal ratification, Sarah continued, "I want to address the concerns that have been raised by those who remain uncertain." She turned to face the section where the holdout delegations were seated. "Ambassador Raid of the Isolation Coalition, you've expressed concern that multidimensional existence would eliminate the unique characteristics that define individual species." The tall, gray-skinned Raid stood slowly. "Indeed, Ambassador Chen. My people have spent millennia developing our distinct culture and way of life. We fear that consciousness sharing across dimensional boundaries would homogenize all species into a single, undifferentiated mass." "A valid concern," Sarah acknowledged. "But let me show you something." The air shimmered, and suddenly multiple versions of Ambassador Raid appeared throughout the assembly. Not copies, but the same being existing across different dimensional states. In one, he was indeed the cautious isolationist he was in baseline reality. In another, he was an enthusiastic explorer reaching out to new species. In a third, he was a philosopher contemplating the nature of identity itself. Which one is the real you? Sarah asked. Raid stared at his multidimensional selves in amazement. They all are. But they're also distinctly me. My people's characteristics, our way of thinking, our cultural values, they're present in all versions. Exactly. Multidimensional existence doesn't erase what makes you unique. It allows you to explore all the ways that uniqueness can be expressed. Representative Korveth of the Military Alliance stood next. Our concern is more practical, Ambassador. How do we maintain security and defense capabilities in a multidimensional civilization? How do we protect ourselves from threats that might emerge from other realities? An excellent question, Sarah replied. The answer lies in understanding that the greatest security comes not from the ability to destroy threats, but from the ability to transform them into opportunities. She gestured again, and the assembly was treated to a demonstration as several hostile dimensional entities, beings of pure aggressive energy, were approached by multidimensional diplomats. Instead of fighting or fleeing, the diplomats found ways to redirect the entity's aggressive impulses into constructive activities, turning potential destroyers into builders and protectors. In baseline reality, you can only respond to threats with force or avoidance, Sarah explained. In multidimensional reality, you can approach the same threat from angles that don't exist in single-dimensional space. You can find solutions that transform enemies into allies. Elder Thessian of the ancient hierarchies raised a withered hand. Child, what you propose sounds wonderful in theory, but my people have seen civilizations rise and fall for over 50,000 years. We have learned to be cautious about fundamental changes. How can we be certain this won't lead to unforeseen catastrophe? Sarah's expression grew more serious. Elder Thessian, your caution comes from wisdom earned through long experience. But consider this. Your people have watched civilizations rise and fall for 50 millennia, while remaining essentially unchanged yourselves. The pattern you've observed, growth, expansion, conflict, collapse, is not an inevitable law of nature. It's a limitation imposed by single-dimensional thinking. The space above the assembly showed a timeline stretching across galactic history, displaying the rise and fall of dozens of major civilizations. Every one of these collapses followed the same pattern, Sarah continued. Resources became scarce. Competition intensified, conflict erupted, and complex systems broke down under stress. But multidimensional civilizations don't face resource scarcity, because they can access infinite variations of reality where different solutions exist. You're asking us to trust in possibilities we cannot fully understand, Elder Thessian observed. I'm asking you to trust in the same spirit of exploration that brought your ancestors to the stars, Sarah replied. Every great leap in galactic civilization required beings to embrace uncertainty in service of greater possibility. Commander Vask, now speaking as a convert rather than an opponent, stood to address his former allies. Honored representatives, 3 weeks ago I came here prepared to destroy this academy and everything it represented. I believed that strength meant the ability to impose order through force. What I discovered is that true strength means the ability to create order through understanding. He activated his own dimensional display, showing his homeworld across multiple realities. My people are still warriors in every dimension, but now we fight against scarcity instead of each other. We battle ignorance instead of neighboring species. We conquer new frontiers of possibility instead of destroying what others have built. Overseer Korix's crystalline form pulsed with harmonious light patterns. The collective adds its voice to Commander Vask's testimony. We have achieved in weeks of multidimensional existence what centuries of single reality effort could not accomplish. Unity without uniformity, strength without domination, progress without destruction. The voting began officially at noon, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. As world after world confirmed their commitment to the transition, the Assembly watched the galactic map transform from a collection of isolated territories into a vast, interconnected web of multidimensional possibilities. When the final vote was tallied, 87% of represented civilizations had chosen to begin the transition. The remaining 13% would be supported and protected in their choice to maintain single-dimensional existence, with the understanding that they could join the transition at any point in the future. Sarah stood before the assembly as the voting concluded, no longer quite the young woman who had arrived at the academy weeks before, but not yet fully the transcended being she would eventually become.